if you have no defined and standardized way of making your parts, that's also something that we consider like a base problem, right? Big in one case they build entire CNC machines, right? Like literally thousands of parts per machine. They extensively use our API to kind of configure their machines and automate everything. I don't know. It's very hard to have a normal job after that.
That's true.
Um,
Yeah.
so I think that's a lot of it. Um, I mean, there's also just like opportunity wise, right? I mean, we had both Zach and I, my co-founder, had job offers like well over 100K.
All right. Then with that, let's kick things off. Tim, welcome to my show.
Yes, thank you.
All right, today we'll talk about ERP software, whatever that means. But before we talk about ERP software and manufacturing a little bit, can you talk to the audience a little bit about your background and yeah, what did you study? What's your primary focus at the moment?
Sure. Yeah. So, in terms of educational background, I went to Georgia Tech, studied electrical engineering, and while there, you know, obviously did my classes, but spent a lot of time kind of in the makerspace around different machinery and kind of helping grow that space. And that's ultimately kind of where the idea for StartProto came from, was kind of out of that experience.
Yeah. How did you actually come up with the idea of StartProto? How did it begin?
Uh, yeah, the original idea for StartProto, I had worked at BMW, and while there helped like manage their internal hackathons, kind of as like a prototyping instructor. So basically, we'd come in at the beginning of the week, have an idea for, whatever it was, like new center console concept or whatever, right? And within that week, basically take that idea to a fully built, like functioning prototype, so that they can then like go patent it, right? So the original idea for Start Proto was to help other companies do the same thing, basically to help them start prototyping. That's where the name comes from. Um, and we got pretty far. We like had a contract in place to help a couple companies do that. I bought a like F-150 pickup truck so I could tow a massive trailer of tools, and then COVID hit, right? So in-person prototyping events weren't really the hot thing then. So yeah, we had the name, we had the logo, went through Capstone, and tried solving a number of different problems, but ultimately solved a problem we knew really well, which in that case was makerspace management. So basically, how do you manage a space where thousands of people use the same set of 50 to 100 tools, right? So that's where it started, and then obviously it's kind of evolved since then.
Yeah. You talked about starting prototyping. Can you walk us through the process? So how does it actually work, your product? From
The
the
product
beginning kind of
now,
to the end.
well,
Yeah.
yeah, that the maker space, like to help people start prototyping, that was a very different thing. The idea for that was, come in at the beginning of a week, teach people like the basics of prototyping, right? Help basically people go from what they normally do at engineering companies, which is what I like to call PowerPoint engineering, and like
Mm.
actually make a physical thing in the real world, right? So that's a different thing. Now, basically, the product helps manufacturers get from all the way from quoting with their customer all the way out to shipping the part out the door, with most of the focus being kind of on the work dissemination and like work in progress tracking. Um, yeah, and the kind of the communication aspects that kind of go along with that.
Yeah. What about the self-serving nature of it? Like we talked about ERP in the beginning. So what you always love to say is ERP shouldn't be hard. Why is it hard when we talk about other competitors of yours, for
Yeah,
example?
I mean, if you go try to buy an ERP system, you're going to be dragged through like a 3 month sales cycle. You're gonna, everyone's gonna
That's true.
explain to you that your problem is really hard. Like, and to some extent that's true, right? Like managing a manufacturing environment is not easy by any means. Um, but it shouldn't be like, I like to say sometimes like ERP, the way it's like traditionally built and sold, feels very much like a heart transplant, right? Which is like something you're scared of doing. You like want to push it off as long as possible, but like you got to do it eventually. Um, we really think it should feel more like a series of haircuts. Like yeah, it's a little annoying to go get a haircut, but like it's not that bad to get 5 haircuts over the course of 3 months, right? So
Mm.
the idea of our product is to really turn that really daunting task of like implementing a management system into something that like feels easy and natural, and then you can kind of expand into kind of as you mature as a company.
Just kind of like a HubSpot for engineers, if you want to call it like that.
Yeah. It's much like what HubSpot did for the sales world, right? The thing
Mm.
that HubSpot's very good at is like, okay, get in, like manage your CRM day one, right? Once you kind of expand into the multiplayer mode, you can do that, right? So similar concept for us. Our single player mode tends to be a lot on the quoting and sales order management side, and then obviously you can get your engineers in the system building out different work instructions and kind of go from there.
Yeah. What teams are usually adopting your solution? Because I was thinking if I would have my own manufacturing facility, wouldn't it work with spreadsheets only, or what's the big challenge when you have spreadsheets
Yeah, I mean,
around?
you can go pretty far with a spreadsheet. It's just typically what we see is it becomes very hard to manage very quickly, and people end up spending 8 to 10 hours a week just like managing their spreadsheet, and like the data is never up to date, it's never live, right? So it's a kind of this,
Yeah.
yeah, it becomes hard to manage, right?
Yeah, definitely. Maybe walk me from the beginning to the end. So, for example, I go to the StartProto website, I sign up
Mhm.
for a trial, a free trial, most likely. And how do I get started? What kind of data can I upload? Where do I even get started? How do I get started
Yeah,
usually?
sure. I mean, if you go to our website right now, obviously this is a process we're improving, but if you go to our website right now, you can get in there, you can sign up for the product. We'll ask you a couple questions about what you do, which helps kind of provide you with relevant example data. And then from there, you have full access to the software, right? So typically, what we suggest people do is start by entering a couple of your sales orders. That'll also prompt you to build out what we call routes, or basically like a recipe of how you're going to make the part. Um,
Hmm.
and from there, it flows pretty naturally, right? So if you're a shop owner, right, typically you're the one entering the sales order. You can invite one of your engineers to help build out kind of the work instructions, um, and then kind of just keep it between the two of you for a little bit, and then kind of once you're ready and you feel like it's useful information there, then you can release it out to your shop floor where they can then go download their cam files, download their drawings, or just view the work instructions that you or your engineer wrote.
Yeah, what are some of the challenges, maybe risks, such as interrupted workflows, for example, or in terms of communication? Maybe you have some case studies that you could talk about where you really help like people get rid of spreadsheets, so to speak, and start using StartProto.
Yeah, there's a couple examples that come to mind, right? But I think something that's important to understand is in a manufacturing environment, like even if your order has, let's say, 10 items on it, right? If each of those items has, you know, five, well, let's just keep it simple, five different steps. Like you could now have parts in any one of five different work in progress states for each of those line items, right? So you're not just tracking 10 items anymore. Now you're tracking like effectively 50 different states, right? And those states are all interdependent. They might branch off, they might come together, etc. Um, so that's usually where we find people have the most struggle um, with kind of their spreadsheets, right? Because if you don't know your work in progress statuses, it's hard to assign work, it's hard to schedule out your machines, etc. um, so yeah, really where we come in is like we make that really easy for you, right? You just say what you're to basically you build out your demand, be that from your sales orders or from sort of minimum stock quantities you're trying to keep, depending on what kind of manufacturing you do. Um,
Mm.
and then from there, with the recipe you give us and kind of knowing your work in progress quantities, we can basically provide your you know operators or shop floor with exactly kind of what they need to do uh, for the day. And then
Got it.
with that obviously comes like purchasing, like knowing what you need to buy, etc. It's basically a giant calculator, if you want to think of it that way.
Yeah. Compared to other people who maybe offer the same thing or software companies, what would you say is your biggest differentiator in terms of like let's maybe talk about USPs, top three USPs compared to other solutions out there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it comes down to like how we're building the company um, in general, and then that kind of flows into the product. But like what pretty much every single one of our competitors has done, right, is they started doing this a long time ago, which has its own benefits, certainly. Um, but the way their product is built is such that it's A, very hard to change at this point, and B, it
Mm.
was built kind of with the assumption that you're going to have 3 weeks with an implementation engineer, or sit through 2 weeks of training with your operators. And you can build very powerful systems that way, but it's very hard to get started, right? It really feels like that heart transplant. Kind of because of the sales model we've chosen with the product led growth, is our product has to do the selling for us, right? Which initially can be a little scary for us, but like basically what it means is that we're forced to make the product so intuitive that people can just click on a button, understand it themselves, and then use it for their day to day, right? And if that's the criteria you're designing in mind, that's a much higher bar than what most of these other companies kind of built their product with, which is, I mean, you can make pretty much anything work if you explain it to someone for 2 weeks, right? But making it intuitive enough to get value out of day one and like naturally grow with the business, that's a much harder problem to solve, right? We're on like version 2 or 3 of the software now, and the main difference is that it is easy enough for people to understand day one.
Yeah.
So,
How
so
do you
that's probably the
actually
biggest differentiator.
Yeah. How do you actually get there? Because I can imagine from a product perspective, like updating the UX and UI all the time is pretty daunting. And also, when you read a book, you're not automatically like you don't have the perfect UX or UI. So, how do you approach that problem? Like for version 4, 5, 6, and so on?
Sure. A lot of iteration. So we work pretty closely with, kind of as a company, we made the decision to work really closely with our first 10 or so customers to really
Mm.
make sure that like everything is built, um, covering as many of those use cases as possible, right? So even in the design phase, we work very closely with customers to know like, okay, this is what you need, this is what this other customer needs. Like, how can we combine those in a way that like makes sense, is easy to use, um, etc. I mean, I went to school for electrical engineering, but quite frankly, I spend most of my time doing product design now, um,
Mhm.
which I've come to enjoy. Um, but yeah, it's a lot of iteration, working closely with customers, and making sure everything we build has like 2 or 3 real kind of user stories behind it of like, this person wants to do this thing, that's why we're building it this way, right? So
Yeah, going back to the beginnings of StartProto, what are things that your first customers were struggling the most? Is it just the onboarding, or is it like the unintuitive UI, UX, whatever it might
well, yeah,
be?
our first customers, we had the benefit of sitting with them for 2 or 3 weeks, so like that product was
Mm.
not very intuitive. But ultimately, actually, it's kind of an interesting story. What they approached us to solve, right, with the makerspace management system, we had like an IoT component that pulled data off of machines, made sure that the right people were using it, etc. Um, and initially, the problem they were looking to solve was like their mag separators for their surface grinders were getting clogged, and that was kind of shutting down work. And they wanted to make sure that those you know, didn't get clogged. And ultimately, we were like, okay, that's tied to the types of jobs you're running, because different jobs are going to have different usage of, um, you know, basically dirtying the mag separator in different amounts, right? So to get people to help us categorize that data, we built like a you know, very simple user interface that just was like, okay, here's like the step you're doing. We'll provide you some documentation just so you like pick up the tablet and use it. You can hit play, pause, stop, etc. Very quickly, that kind of became the thing people cared about most. They were like, oh, great. Now we have a way to like show people the work they need to do for the day, right? Which for them had been very hard. It was a lot of like, literally they would get handed a stack of sticky notes where it's like, okay, here's job one, here's job two, like work through it,
Mm.
right? And when priorities would change, obviously the sticky notes don't magically rearrange themselves. But that was kind of the problem that they found kind of most enticing. And after that, we were like, okay, cool. You need to know how many parts are at each step. All right, we expanded into that. You need to know like what things you have on order. All right, great. We'll like take the demand calculation into it. And from there, we've sort of expanded out into a lot of the other business functions like purchasing and shipping and receiving. And we have an integration coming out soon with QuickBooks, so it'll kind of tie into your accounting and just keep everything really live all the way from like customer asks for a part to be made to like it ships out the door and it's delivered, right?
Mm. Please tell me one of the future integrations is going to be ChatGPT.
well,
Is that
we'll
planned?
see. Um, Everyone likes to add AI to everything. I think there's a point of diminishing return that we're starting to hit on a lot of things.
Mm.
Um,
That's true.
but actually, our documentation tool that we're about to integrate, that will have basically a, you know, kind of conversational interface to where you can ask it stuff and it'll like pull you the most relevant help article. So we're hoping that can kind of help streamline a lot of the support side of things. So you can get very simple questions can answer automatically. So in a way, I think that that algorithm is actually based on ChatGPT. So the product itself doesn't use it directly.
Got it. Okay,
But
so from a back-end perspective, you don't have any statistical models or like recommender systems in place where you would, for example, reallocate resources in a specific way. It's just done like in a very simple manner, like just reordering sticky notes, as you've said.
I mean,
Is that
it's
correct?
there's a lot that goes into that, right? The thing is, for the most part, it is a like well defined mathematical problem, right? In terms of like what needs to happen when. That being said,
Mm-hmm.
we we're collecting the data in such a way that like we can later run different training models on it, right? Because what we'll see happen a lot is like, yeah, because of the communication is so much more open now, we'll see, okay, this part takes you, actually, let's see right here. Um, you know, maybe this part, actually, this is a good example because like this is, you know, is that going to focus? Anyway, yeah, there you go. Maybe. Okay. Anyway, like this part, like
Yeah.
you can do it over the course of, you know, actually this happened with a customer. Like they were making this in 4 different steps, right? They had a lathe step, they had you know, a step where they drilled these holes in the side, and another step where they drilled this at the top and kind of like put the hex on it. And you know, kind of as they improved, they were able to combine more and more of those steps. And now it's actually just like a one-op part. I imagine they got a new machine to kind of help with that. But that's the kind of stuff to where we could see like, okay, since we have the CAD model, we know what type of part it is. Like we know that other manufacturers have improved these parts by doing X, Y, and Z. You know, eventually we'd like to get to like, you know, all the way out to suggesting process improvement. Um, so that's something we look forward to doing in like 2 or 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
But right now we're really kind of focusing on those core day-to-day flows.
Got it. When it comes to integrations for engineers, for example, such you mentioned QuickBooks, and we talk about Autodesk Fusion, for example. Does that exist as well? Like, for example, if you could import or export your CAD immediately to StartProto, is that possible?
Um, yeah, we do have a form of integration with Fusion 360 and some of the other programs. Right now, it's still somewhat manual. You kind of have to like link them on their own. But yeah,
Mm.
we definitely want to kind of explore doing that a little more natively because really most of the market is dominated by kind of 2 or 3 of those um, CAD platforms.
Got it. Yeah. One interesting thing that I saw, I think, in one of your presentations was the so-called manufacturing hierarchy of needs. So not Maslow's, but the manufacturing hierarchy of needs. How
Yes.
does that tie into the product? Why is it so important to think about that?
Yeah, I don't know if you can edit it over top of this, but like basically at the base, there's certain kind of as we've talked to at this point hundreds of different manufacturers, you kind of all see them struggling with the same things, and like kind of depending on how mature they are in like their, you know, the growth of their business or process maturity, et cetera, you kind of see them moving kind of up the pyramid, right? At the very base, right? Like your shop doesn't work if you like don't do some very basic things, right? If you can't bring in work effectively, right? That's on your quoting, that's on your order management, like that's a problem, right? If you have no defined and standardized way of making your parts, that's also something that we consider like a base problem, right?
Yeah.
Um, Purchasing materials so that it's there on time for people to actually do the work, also very important, right? And then kind of once you move up, you get into inventory tracking and like let's assign tasks, let's document work, and um, kind of towards the top becomes like, okay, how do we collaborate well with our other vendors? How do we, you know, ensure that we're profitable on these parts, which it seemed like a base need, but for so many manufacturers, like the way they figure out if they're making money is like, is the machine running? Like, are we making chips? Right? Like, if yes, good. If no, bad. But if you actually dive deep, that's not always the case, right? They just all they know is that for the quarter we made money. What we mean with ensuring profitability is like on a per job basis. Like, are we going to make money making this part, or are we just going to like lose money because you know whatever? And then kind of the very top of the pyramid for most people is like, how do we improve, you know, how do we improve what we do so that we can grow as a business, so we can expand, so we can, make it easier to onboard new employees, to add capacity, to add machines, etc. So that's kind of what we've put together in order to to explain the importance of some of these features that we're building. And we kind of initially with our product started kind of in that middle of the pyramid and kind of figured that like, oh yeah, like everyone's got to be above this, right? But we've noticed that there's a lot there's sort of a lack of solutions to solve those base problems. Um, so now that's kind of what a lot of our self-service product is based on, is like, how do we have like a good single player mode where like, an owner or a manager can get in, can manage their quotes, can manage their, um, work documentation, and then kind of expand up and into the rest of the business kind of as those core needs are solved.
Yeah, when we talk about making money, how does the monetization strategy of StartProto work? Like, do you have different plans, different tiers? Is there a free plan? I think there is. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
how does it work from
Yeah, so the
perspective?
pricing is public on our website, and it's something we're seeing what works best. But right now, basically, the free tier has a somewhat limited feature set. Right, it'll get you all the stuff you need, and you can kind of make your first 50 orders in the system for free.
Hmm.
That's usually, by the time you get anywhere close to that, you're going to know if it's for you or not. If it's not, that's okay. We don't take it personally. Obviously, we'd like to know why, but um, so that's kind of the free tier. And then you have, I think we're calling it right now the professional tier, which is, still self-serve. You get a lot more of those features. You kind of unlock like unlimited orders, unlimited files, unlimited, stuff like that. And you get some of the more advanced, you know, kind of min stock and some of the other workflows that are important to some manufacturers, but not necessarily all. And then after that, we kind of go into our enterprise tiers. So if you really have a bigger company, um, and you have different needs when it comes to like users or pricing, or that's also kind of the tier where we support custom integrations, and you can kind of work with our team to configure it exactly how you need. So
Yeah,
that's kind of where we're at now. Um, we do want to make sure it's in line with like kind of how we're providing value. So I think long term we might move to something that's a little more like HubSpot, where it's like you can buy more. I mean, not committing to this necessarily, but like you can you know unlock more basically usage thresholds, or you can kind of upgrade in the different feature sets kind of as you need them, right? Which yeah, I think just keeps it fair and makes sure that like our pricing is aligned with how we're providing value.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. When we talk about the long-term vision, what was the decision maybe to take a step back from an entrepreneurial perspective to go the PLG way? And why not another business model?
Yeah, it was one of those things where like the traditional sales cycle, we figured out we can sell it that way, right? And like it's great that
Yeah.
we can. Like yes, if we sit there with someone for 2 or 3 weeks and like we get them in the product, etc., like that works really well. Um, but what we found is there's a lot of manufacturers, I think, and much like I'm the same way, right? Like I don't want to have to like talk to a salesperson just for them to like promise me everything in the world that's gonna
Mm,
like this thing's gonna do, and then like I get to the product and it's not quite there, right? Like I'd much rather evaluate the product for myself, look through
yeah.
people's documentation, look through everything else, and kind of make a decision from there. And for us as a company too, like if the product's not right for someone, we want to know that before we spend a lot of time and energy kind of educating them on it, right? And um, this early in the company, we have the opportunity to do that, and it's kind of something we see as a major differentiator in terms of like it incentivizes us to do the right things for our customer too, right? So that's a lot of where that came from, is like we know if we go that route, we'll be forced to make a better product. We'll be forced to be better at marketing, and like I mean, yes, at scale it is also better from like a cost of sales perspective, but we actually have a long time before we start seeing some of those benefits, but it's moving in the right direction.
That's super cool. And what was your decision, or why did you make the decision to actually found a company in the first place? I mean, you could
Yeah, I've
have gone
always
the classical path. You were doing electrical engineering. You could have done the classical 9 to 5. What was the initial motivation to do something or start something on your own?
yeah, it's a couple. So from a young age, I've always liked doing my own thing.
Mm,
Um, like I was the kind of kid who like spends like I had a phase where I'd go on Craigslist and like find free chainsaws and just like that didn't work. I'd fix them up and like resell them. Like that was the kind of stuff that I did as a kid, right? Always very mechanically inclined. Both my grandfathers like built their own houses. One of my grandfathers is like a trained tool and die maker. So I grew up with a lot of that, right? They didn't really know what else to do with me. So I just like played with tools. So that's kind of how I got into the makerspace thing and ultimately that. But yeah, in high school too, I had my own video production company where I'd film. Started out with like doing some local stuff, but ultimately got into weddings where I was making a couple $1,000s a weekend, right? So I'd like fly to some wedding, film it, edit it, get it out the same day, and kind of come back with 3 grand more in my pocket, right?
Mm,
And once you kind of experience that sort of autonomy and you realize like just how the world works, like you
yeah,
don't, I don't know, it's very hard to have a normal job after that.
that's true.
Um,
Yeah.
so I think that's a lot of it. Um, I mean, there's also just like opportunity wise, right? I mean, we had both Zach and I, my co-founder, had job offers like well over 100K to like where we could just like clock out the rest of our lives, get a 9 to 5, probably end up, having a very nice life. Um, but I don't know, there was definitely an opportunity, and we saw that there was like a big need and a problem in a space that we liked and enjoyed. So we kind of went for it, and lived a whole summer off of basically just savings. And yeah, it turns out that like if you solve a problem that has real world um, benefit, like it works out pretty well. So
Yeah, I like that. Super inspirational. So, what's the future vision then of StartProto? Where do you see yourself? It's a classical question. Where do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years?
yeah, I mean, we'd really like to. I think at the trajectory we're moving, we really see ourselves kind of becoming like the go-to, you know, ERP MES type solution for small manufacturers, right? Um,
Mm,
we think that we can win on a product and kind of sales strategy perspective, and we have some very exciting features coming out to where it'll be really easy to kind of collaborate with other shops, et cetera, right? So we
yeah.
see kind of the network of Start Proto shops growing in such a way to where it'd be super easy to send a job over to your send a PO to your seal supplier. They can respond in real time. You send something out to heat treat, like that comes back in real time, and kind of make that make the communication not just within your shop really smooth, but kind of in the whole ecosystem, right? Because um, yeah, it's very interesting. The top like tier one automotive suppliers are very well connected. Um, but like the reality is that none of those places work without their network of sometimes literally hundreds of shops at like the 5 to 25 person level, right? And that's kind of really what we see, us stepping in and kind of providing a solution there and really helping smooth things out.
Excellent. Have you also thought about expanding into larger segments or maybe even different industries, like expanding also the product? Is that something you're thinking about at the moment?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, right now we're very heavily focused on kind of our initial market, but we have some accounts that are 30 plus person enterprises that build like big. In one case, they build entire CNC machines, right? Like literally thousands of parts per machine. They extensively use our API to kind of configure their machines and automate everything, right? So like they're we're almost done setting this up, but like soon they'll be able to like a salesperson can configure a machine. Let's say it's a 5 foot by 10 foot machine with this spindle and kind of these like different tool options, and all of that will flow completely out to the shop floor. It'll tell them everything to purchase, like etc. Right. So we love those use cases, um, and we know the product works for them. So we'd love to kind of eventually expand into functionality that better it makes it easy for those types of enterprises to kind of get into the tool as well.
Interesting. Nice. Cool. And then maybe to wrap up the podcast, Tim, I'll give the last words to you. Any motivating words to all the manufacturers out there? And maybe we'll even put a link down in the description to maybe for people if they want to maybe test Start Proto or get started
Yeah,
with
I
Start
would say
Proto.
that the biggest thing for manufacturers is that like obviously most of you guys are very good at making things, right? Um, but from our experience, kind of the limiting factor for a lot of these businesses tends to be how they manage the business itself, right? And it seems very daunting to kind of change from whatever system it is you have now, right? Be it paper, be it sticky notes, Excel sheets, etc. Um, but I mean, we've seen as much as like 35-40% throughput improvements, or shops that are now able to handle 2 or 3 times the work than they did previously, just by like, basically easing that administrative burden, getting it into a system that kind of does most of that for you. And, um, you can almost eliminate entire like days worth of work a week, um, off of just that. So, I mean, I guess the message I want to leave you with is like, it's not that scary, and there's a very bright light at the end of the tunnel. And we'd like to think that ours is kind of the easiest to get started with. So, yeah, obviously, feel free to try the product, reach out. We're pretty easy to get a hold of. Um, but yeah, I think that's most of what I'd want to leave manufacturers with.
Awesome. Short and crisp podcast. I'll put all relevant links down in the description. Then obviously also the link to Tim's LinkedIn, etc. So you can easily reach out to him. With that, Tim, thank you so much. Hopefully there will be a second part in the future. And yeah, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Yusuf.